Amarachi walked through the market with the quiet confidence of someone who had built an empire from her own hands. Her stalls were the largest in the village, stocked with fabrics from towns she had traveled to herself. Her farmlands fed dozens of families, and her investments had begun to stretch into neighboring villages. She could have married any man, but she hadn't. Not because she was proud, not because she didn't want companionship. She waited because she had never seen love done right. Her mother had spent decades beside a man who never lifted his gaze to meet her heart. Her father had been absent in ways that left silent cracks she could still feel in her chest. Amarachi wanted to know how it felt to be truly loved, not admired for wealth, not desired for beauty, but seen for all she was. She would not settle for anything less. Men noticed her. Some watched from afar, offering compliments that were more about possession than admiration. Others lingered too close, smiling too long, asking for favors disguised as help. She had learned to read them, to keep her distance, to smile without giving anything away. Then there was Obinna. He appeared in small ways, carrying heavy packages when the streets were muddy, holding doors open for her employees, listening when she spoke, never interrupting, always polite. Sometimes he brought small gifts, wild flowers, fruits, and
This is
once
for
a
you.
sleek
It's from Blux
wristwatch from
Accessories.
Blux Accessories.
Thank you, it's beautiful.
She held it in her
I
hand
love
and
it.
felt seen, truly seen. He wasn't like the others. He didn't look at her like a prize or a goal. He looked at her like someone who had earned every thread of her empire, and he respected it. Yet there was something subtle, almost imperceptible in his gaze when she spoke about expansion or plans, something she didn't notice at first. The other men in the village noticed too. Some were amused, some resentful, some envious. He had earned a space beside her, a closeness they had all hoped for themselves. And for the first time, Amarachi saw how the men she had ignored for so long would react when challenged by someone they could not easily dismiss. She watched him laugh with her employees, remembered their names, carried messages, and she felt a pull she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. And still, she remained cautious. She had learned the price of misplaced trust. Yet, as the sun dipped low over the village, casting long shadows across her stalls and farmlands, Amarachi could not deny it. She longed, just a little, to feel what it meant to be truly cherished, not as a businesswoman, not as a prize, not as someone to be measured, but as herself. And in that longing, a quiet storm began to take shape, one that would test her heart, challenge her empire, and change the life she had fought so hard to build. Obinna had become a quiet presence in Amarachi's life. At first, it was small things, carrying parcels from her suppliers, checking in on the farmlands, offering advice she didn't even know she needed. He remembered details others would have forgotten, the names of her employees' children, the exact shade of fabric she preferred, the little customs she held sacred. The village noticed. Whispers followed him everywhere. Men who had always coveted Amarachi's attention now scowled at him in the market square. Some tried subtle jabs. "She'll be trouble for anyone who stays too close," one said, leaning against a fence, his eyes tracking Obinna. Others were more aggressive, hinting that he was overstepping, that he should leave the woman's business alone. Obinna, however, smiled at it all, calm and patient. To Amarachi, he seemed steady, thoughtful, different from the rest. He asked questions, listened to answers, offered his hand to steady her when she leaned too heavily on the ledger at the stall, and even suggested small improvements in her trading routes. He made her laugh in ways she hadn't in years. And slowly, Amarachi let herself trust him. She allowed herself to enjoy the companionship, to imagine a future where she didn't have to carry the weight of everything alone. Then he asked for something more. A shipment, her biggest yet, of rare patterned fabrics from Lagos. He said it was a calculated risk, an opportunity to expand her empire beyond the village, to solidify her place as the most sought-after trader in the region. His voice was persuasive, gentle, almost tender. "Trust me," he said. "I'll handle everything. You just focus on the business you already run so well." Amarachi hesitated, feeling a small knot of unease. But she brushed it aside. She trusted him. She wanted to believe that someone could be good, even when the world had shown her mostly selfishness. She handed him the funds. She allowed him to coordinate with the suppliers. She allowed herself imagine her empire growing larger than she had ever dreamed. She fastened the Block's Accessories wristwatch around her wrist before reviewing the shipment details, her fingers lingering for just a second longer than necessary. The cool metal rested against her skin like reassurance. It had quietly become part of her daily routine, a symbol of the love she believed was steady, intentional, real. Weeks passed. Then the silence came. No shipments arrived, no calls, no messages. And slowly the truth revealed itself. Obinna had been trusted too much. The contacts he promised were fake. The investments a lie. The money gone. Amarachi felt the ground shift beneath her feet. The debt collectors arrived first thing the next morning, shouting, pushing, threatening to seize her stalls. Her employees clung to her skirts, trembling. Traders in neighboring towns began to murmur, wondering how someone as careful as her could fall into such a trap. Other men in the village seized the opportunity to gloat. Some whispered that she had finally met her match and that her pride had blinded her. Some wondered if Obinna was in on it from the start. But she didn't have time for speculation. She had to act. She sold land she had quietly purchased years ago. She pawned jewelry she had kept for emergencies. She worked day and night, counting bolts of fabric, arranging deliveries, repaying debts. Every stitch she sewed felt like a small reclaiming of herself. But it was more than money she had almost lost. It was trust, hope, the fragile belief that someone could stand beside her without trying to own her. That night, long after the market emptied, Amarachi sat alone in the dim glow of a single lantern. Her stalls were half bare, her savings nearly gone. Her fingers traced the face of the Block's Accessories wristwatch on her wrist. The ticking was steady, indifferent to her heartbreak. Time, it seemed, did not pause for betrayal. She inhaled slowly. Tomorrow, she will begin again. But this time, she will build differently. Stronger, colder, smarter. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the village roads, Obinna was living his life, unaware that the woman he thought he had broken was quietly becoming something far more dangerous. The first weeks of rebuilding were not graceful. There were mornings Amarachi opened her stall with only half the fabric she once displayed. Customers noticed. Some pretended not to. Others asked carefully veiled questions about the shipment that never came. She answered calmly. She kept her back straight. But every coin counted felt like proof that survival required more than pride. When a trader from a neighboring village tried to negotiate unfairly, she did not smile the way she once would have. She let silence stretch until he adjusted his price. Word began to spread. She is different now. She no longer entertained unnecessary compliments. She no longer lingered in conversations that had no purpose. Men who once assumed access found doors politely closed. And yet, strength did not silence memory. There were nights when she sat beneath the moon and felt the absence beside her, not of Obinna, but of what she had hoped he represented. Partnership, relief, softness. She did not miss the man. She missed the idea. That realization changed her. One afternoon, as she washed tomatoes freshly picked from her garden, her fingers brushed the Block's Accessories wristwatch resting against her skin. She had considered removing it, more than once, but she never did. It no longer felt like a reminder of betrayal. It felt like a reminder of the woman who had dared to believe in something beautiful. And she refused to resent that version of herself. The watch ticked steadily, unaffected, unbroken. Time had not deceived her. A man had. She straightened, and for the first time, the watch did not symbolize love given. It symbolized strength kept. It symbolized a beginning that belonged to her alone. It was on one of those evenings that she noticed the girl. Small, quiet, sitting near the edge of the market long after others had gone home. Ada. She did not beg. She did not speak loudly. She simply watched. Amarachi recognized that look. The look of someone learning early that the world does not soften for the unguarded. The next morning, Amarachi handed her a simple task.
Sort these by color. Ada worked carefully, precisely. By the end of the week, she was counting change without error. By the end of the month, she was smiling. The store felt different. Not lighter, but fuller. For the first time since the betrayal, Amarachi felt something shift inside her that was not anger, not caution, not ambition. Responsibility. Choice. She was not rebuilding just to prove she could. She was rebuilding to create something no one could threaten again. And somewhere beyond the village, Obinna's name still surfaced in passing conversations. Some said he had left town entirely. Some said he had profited elsewhere. Amarachi did not ask, but she listened. Because strength was no longer about closing her heart. It was about knowing exactly when to open it. And she was preparing, not for revenge, for reckoning.
Years had passed since the storm that had nearly destroyed her empire. Amarachi's shops thrived. Her farmland fed not just her own household, but the families of those who had stood beside her through hardship. Her business had expanded beyond the village borders. And yet, despite everything she had rebuilt, her heart had grown quieter. She no longer waited for love to arrive. She had learned that love, when true, came in many forms, and sometimes it was not the kind that arrived with a man. Ada. The little girl she had once found alone and watchful had grown into a lively, curious child who adored her with fierce devotion. Amarachi taught her more than trade. She taught her patience, strength, kindness. They spent mornings counting bolts of fabric, afternoons tending the farmlands, evenings laughing over stories that softened the hardest days. In Ada's laughter, Amarachi discovered a different kind of love, one without bargaining, without betrayal, without fear, a love she could give freely and guard fiercely. And then, one afternoon, he appeared, Obinna. Older now, life had marked him in quiet ways, in the lines around his eyes, in the heaviness of his shoulders. He stood at the edge of the market square, watching her shops, watching Ada. I need to speak with you, he said, his voice no longer confident but careful. Amarachi studied him. There was no trembling in her chest, no ache, no longing, only clarity. You almost destroyed everything I built, she said, her voice calm and level. You took my money, my trust, and my hope. And yet, I survived. I grew. I became stronger than I ever was before you stepped into my life. Obinna opened his mouth to speak. She raised her hand slightly, not in anger, but in finality. She glanced at the Block's accessories wristwatch once more, the one that had made her heart flutter years ago. Now, it rested against her skin as a quiet reminder. She had survived, she had loved, she had learned. I did not need you then, and I do not need you now. You may apologize, you may explain, but my life is no longer yours to enter. The market had grown silent. Whispers hovered in the air. Some said he made a mistake. Some called it youthful recklessness. A few would even whisper that a man's ambition sometimes requires sacrifice. The world rarely gathered stones for men like Obinna. It adjusted, it excused, it moved on. But Amarachi did not wait for the world to demand accountability. She had already rebuilt what he tried to break. She reached for Ada's hand and walked away, past the traders who once doubted her, past the men who once sought to possess her attention, past the version of herself who believed love required sacrifice. She did not look back. Inside her home, with Ada's laughter filling the rooms, Amarachi allowed herself a private smile. She had found love in the life she built. Not in dependency, not in validation, but in choice. The village had once measured a woman's worth by the man who stood beside her. Amarachi had rewritten that measure. Her legacy was not a husband, it was a home, a business that survived betrayal, a child who felt safe enough to laugh loudly, and a heart that remained whole. In a world that tried to reduce women to prizes or possessions, Amarachi built a life where she chose everything, where she chose herself. And that, more than admiration, more than wealth, more than the approval of any man, was enough.